Hello and welcome to episode 51 of MMO Weekly, presented by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, along with my co-host and MMO executive editor, Mike Mayer. And Mike, I know we were just talking about you were on vacation last week. We missed you, but happy to have you back here.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually in Seattle where the home run derby is going on right now, and glad to be back and time to watch the home run derby and time to track the draft the last couple of days. So there's no games being played, but still plenty of stuff going on.
Yeah, this is a very busy time of year for you with the draft, which we'll get to a little bit later on in the show. But obviously, like you mentioned, home run derby is going on right now. We're in the All-Star break. Mets, as it stands right now, disappointing first half. To close out the first half there, they won 6 straight. Obviously, to close things off, they lost 2 out of 3 in San Diego, but they showed a little bit of life there. Alvarez had a really nice road trip. But overall, it's not been great. It's been, I guess, highlighted by poor pitching. Obviously, Scherzer just put up another not good start against the Padres this weekend. But I guess just want to get your initial thoughts overall this first half for the Mets, and we'll get into more specifics during the show. But just your immediate kind of reaction here as the first half has come to a close.
Yeah, I mean, certainly good that they won a couple of series before to kind of get them at least, I guess, within striking distance of the wild card. But I mean, overall, if before the year you're going to predict that the Mets only had 42 wins and they'd be over 15 games out of first place, that's certainly not something anyone expected. I mean, anyone in the Mets organization, any fans, I mean, I don't think other organizations would have expected that. It's just they're certainly one of the bigger underperforming teams in baseball, along with the Padres, who they just lost a series to. So, yeah, there's no other way to put it than disappointing, underwhelming. I mean, I think the last couple of games kind of just show you what the season's been, especially with Scherzer having another rough outing, and having trouble with the home run ball. He's now given up 18 home runs this year already, and he only gave up 13 of all of last year. So, I mean, that's very concerning, obviously, and his ERA is up over 4. That's certainly not what you want from one of your co-aces. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it quite a bit, and unfortunately, Mets fans have had to discuss it quite a bit, just how bad the Mets have been. I don't think there's really any other way to describe it. They're not, I mean, they're in 4th place in the division. They're not really, I mean, 6.5 games out of wild card, but there's quite a few teams between them and a wild card spot. So it's put Billy Epler and Steve Cohen and everyone else in that front office kind of in a predicament of what do we do? Of course, they still got three more weeks of games before they get to the trade deadline, or 2.5, but to kind of find out, I mean, if they go have a very bad couple of weeks, that might make an easier decision, or if they have 2 very good weeks, it could make the decision easier. But they're kind of in no man's land right now, where you're so they can't win the division. That's out of the window already, so that they don't have that to even fall back on. So they're over 6 games out of the wild card, multiple teams in front of them, on a win now team. So like, what do you do at the deadline? They've done a little of both so far, right? They sold Escobar to get some pitching prospects and ate the money, and they also acquired Trevor Gott to get some bullpen help and ate some money in that deal, the Chris Flexen salary. And I mean, they gave out Zach Muckenhern, who it was a guy they signed on a minor league deal this year. So it was the money they were eating of Chris Flexen's salary to get Gott. So they made a selling move and a buying move. And I think it's really going to depend on what happens over the next 2.5, 3 weeks, and just how the team looks, how Scherzer looks, how Verlander looks, how many games they win, and if they can get closer to maybe 4 games out of wild card, or like I said, if they fall back to 8, I think you get 8, 9 games back. I don't think you have much choice. to sell guys like Tommy Pham, David Robertson, and any other guys, maybe Mark Canna, Vogelback, if someone wants to give you a piece for Vogelback. They're certainly not. I don't think they're going to get into selling off stars like Scherzer, Verlander, at least partially because those guys are underperforming what their contract is.
Sure.
So that really kills their value. But the Mets are in a weird spot because of their disappointing first half. And I mean, we've talked a lot about kind of where that blame lies quite a bit. And I mentioned Scherzer. I mean, that's certainly one of the biggest things is the pitching. The starting pitching has been underwhelming, and that kind of starts with Scherzer, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy that I know they signed Verlander to the big deal, and he's an ace too, but Scherzer was an ace last year and pitched like it outside of the last 2 games of the year. So you're expecting him to just slide right back into that spot this year and to anchor that rotation. And he's had a couple of good starts this year, but outside of that, he really hasn't been very good. He's been very mediocre. And that's just not what they need. And that kind of, it goes down from there. I mean, we can talk about other guys like Jeff McNeil's been even worse since the last time we talked. Starling Marte, still, he had a home run in one game and a couple hits the next, but then that's what you get out of Marte. You get 2 good games in maybe a couple of weeks, and you see it and you're like, oh, maybe he's going to bounce out of this, but it just hasn't happened. He's been in a season-long funk, and really Jeff McNeil has too. He's shown no power at all, and when that type of guy, if he's going to be no power Jeff McNeil, he needs to hit 330, and he's not at all. He's hitting 260. So, I mean, I think that's really the biggest culprits for me is the starting pitching and those 2 guys, because they're expecting a lot of McNeil and Marte. These guys are supposed to hit 2nd, 3rd, 5th in the lineup, and they're supposed to score a lot of runs. They're supposed to produce a lot of runs, and they're just not doing it. And that's tough for a Mets lineup. That look, the Mets didn't get that thumper, right? Like they flirted with Carlos Correa. He hasn't hit well this year, but they flirted with him because of how he's done offensively in his career. And that just didn't happen. There was some other names they tried to get, like Andrew McCutchen, stuff like that. But Pham has been one of the Mets' best hitters, so that has certainly worked out. But they needed another thump in the lineup, and they haven't gotten that. And it looks even worse now when you have guys like Marte and McNeil just underperforming so badly. I mean, you're talking about guys that have a OPS plus around 80, and these are guys that are supposed to be 30 to 35 points higher than that. That's a huge difference from what they did last year and from what you're expecting this year. So I know the bullpen has had some struggles too, but I think in all reality, going into the year, if we had to predict one of the 3, whether it was starting pitching, offense, or the bullpen, once they had the injuries to Edwin Diaz, Montez de Oca, Coonrod, some other depth pieces, you would have probably said, hey, the bullpen is probably going to have some struggles. And it has, and it's looked worse because the starting pitching hasn't been able to pitch innings. So once you get into, they already had some of the depth depleted with injuries. And then once the starters can't pitch 5-6 innings on a nightly basis, that's going to make the bullpen look even worse. So, yeah, there's not a whole lot of positives. I know we're going to try to get to some of them after we go through the negatives, but disappointing is definitely the word that I would use for the Mets first half.
Yeah, disappointing and underwhelming. That's the only things you could think of, so far in the season. And I think you hit the nail on the head with everything you said. To dive into it just a little bit more, like you said, the Mets are 6.5 games back in the wild card, which really isn't that much. But again, it's 5 or 6 teams. It might be a little more than I'm even saying that they have to leapfrog at this point, which makes it really, really tough. Like you're talking about. Didn't win a series the whole month of June, which probably is more than anything going to come back and haunt them. I mean, we know the Mets June swoons in the past, but that was the worst I've ever seen. They've won 7 games the whole month of June. They've won 6 in July already. So, once the All-Star break comes back on Friday, they could break that already. So it's a multitude of things as far as the pitching goes. I think, and we'll get into Buck, but I put a lot of that also on the roster construction with Epler. Obviously he re-signed Diaz, he re-signed Ottavino, and he brought in Robertson. But outside of that, in the bullpen didn't do much. And was hoping really, when he brought back more than anything Edwin Diaz and signed a guy like Verlander, like you're saying, I think they thought with, on the front line that they would be covered. And there was not a lot of depth and not a lot of room for error there. And once you lost Diaz to that injury, you really saw, a bullpen that was exposed. And then just the theme with all this, even more than the offense struggling, is the starting pitching giving them nothing, like you said. So a bullpen that's already, a major key down and, playing with almost an arm tie behind their back. When your starter pitching gives zero length, like you're saying, there's not a lot of room for success. So it's not.
Think of this: the Mets have a starting pitcher that's at the All-Star Game facilities,
right? That's
festivities
true.
right now,
right.
And who would have ever guessed that it's Kodai Senga,
right,
and not Max Scherzer or Justin Verlander? I think that really gives you a look into what the Mets season is. That Kodai Senga, which is awesome that he's pitched great as a rookie to be there, but it just tells you how bad those two aces have been, to the point that neither of them, who are, even if they pitch decent, are going to get invitations to this type of event, especially later in their careers. So I think just seeing Senga there it just shows you wow, neither of those guys are at the All-Star game. Something's going wrong with the Mets.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a decent transition to focus on some positives, considering there's really only a couple from this first half. And we can start with Kodai Senga. Obviously he's a guy, he's had an up and down year. He's a replacement, obviously, we know, for another also that's not playing. But he's what is it, a 3.3 ERA, somewhere around there. He's been up and down. But the stuff is there. That ghost fork is everything as advertised. We know that that's no gimmick. That is a legit out pitch and one of the best outs, out weapons in the game. He's got good stuff and he can command it. We know he walks a lot of guys, and that was his MO even in Japan. But, you can see at least once he has hopefully a year under his belt, being in America, understanding the mound, the ball, the league, all that, and just being more comfortable, that he every bit has frontline starter type stuff. I think we've seen that, especially the last couple of starts, him show now why the Mets went and gave him such, a nice contract for a player that hadn't pitched in the States before.
Yeah, and I mean, like you talked about, he has some issues with walks, and more so at the start of the year. He's done better recently, and I think just the fact that he's pitched well enough to be a reserve replacement in the All-Star game, that talks a lot about the potential for him, right? Because like you said, it's a lot of adjustments that he's had to make. Different ball, different mound, new country. There's a big transition for him. So for him to come out and pitch the way he has, look, he's been the Mets' best starting pitcher, and not necessarily by default. He's been good. He's holding hitters to a average under 200 this year.
Right.
So he's limited hits, and like you said, the walks are just something he's got to continue to improve on. And I think that's something his command and control, I think, will get better with time as he gets more used to the ball and the mound and all the different things in the U.S. So, and we've seen it recently. He's had some really nice outings recently where he's kept his pitch count down. So, yeah, Senga I think he's obviously the clear positive in the starting rotation. I can't think of many other positives from the rotation. So he's the clear positive there. And we mentioned David Robertson has been a big positive in the bullpen. He was brought in to have a big role. He's gotten a bigger role because of what happened to Diaz. And outside of a couple of outings, he's been dominant. He's been really good. He's been everything the Mets could have hoped for. Right. And I think more because of they certainly wasn't expecting him to be in this role. And that's where he's been in, and he's been great. And if they do decide to trade some player. He's certainly a guy that's going to get you back a solid prospect because he's going to be one of the best options out there. So, yeah, I mean, he's one of the positives in the bullpen. And I know we mentioned him a little bit is Francisco Alvarez. I mean, look, the kid's at 17 home runs now. He's 21 years old. He's already got the second most home runs for a rookie catcher under 22. He's only 9 behind a guy named Johnny Bench, who I think everyone knows. So he's very likely going to set that record. With the home run barrages that he goes on, he could set the record by the end of July. The way he goes on these barrages and just hits 4 and 5 games. Look, yeah, he's been great, and he's been good defensively too. So that's obviously a big surprise and a welcome surprise because he was supposed to. The Mets signed Narvaez and had Nido there so that they could kind of slowly bring him in this year, Alvarez. And the injuries led to him coming up, playing very well, them essentially DFAing Nido, and now he's in AAA. And Narvaez is barely even playing because of how well Alvarez is playing. So, yeah, I think that's probably, you would have to say, the biggest positive on the offensive side. I know over the last month or so, since the birth of his second daughter, Francisco Alvarez has been the best player in baseball. His WAR from Fangraphs is 1.8 since June 17th when his second daughter was born, and that leads baseball, and it leads baseball by quite a bit. So he's actually right up there. I think coming into the second half, he's 6th in the National League and 13th overall in FWAR for position players. So he's quietly doing it because he had some struggles and his average still isn't where you would normally see it, but everything else is right there. He leads all the shortstops in baseball in home runs, RBIs, runs, weighted runs created, plus he's right at the top. WAR, he's second only to Wander Franco. So yeah, it's just Francisco Lindor having another superstar. Like this is what he is. He's a superstar. Unfortunately, he didn't get chosen to play in the All-Star game. We could spend a lot of time on that being oversight, but yeah, I mean, between Kodai Senga, David Robertson, Francisco Lindor, the Franciscos, I mean, other than that, it's tough to find the positives in what the Mets did in the first 90 games of the year.
Yeah, and we talk about these positives. You say these names: Alvarez, Lindor, Robertson, right? Alonso outside of the average and getting hit in the before getting hit in the wrist was having a great year. There is a really good core here. This is a team that should win, and that's the most frustrating part. And it just goes back to the fact that they just got nothing from this start outside of a guy like Senga, who we know has been up and down, but like they've really just gotten no starting pitching, and that's been the theme and the killer. Just on the point on Alvarez that I just kind of want to follow up with. There was a play in Arizona. It was a drop third strike, pass ball, I should say. Ball into the backstop. Alvarez sprints, slides, comes up, throws the runner out. He's been great defensively. And I keep saying it. It's funny, over the years, so many players I feel like that we've heard about, from Conforto, McNeil, Alonso, guys we've heard can't play defense. And then they come up and they overperform. I know Alonso was a little bit of a different story. I think he put a lot of work into his defensive abilities because apparently he was extra bad in the minor leagues. But, this is a guy that really has been super, impressive, framing the ball, blocking balls, and he's got a great arm. And obviously with the new rules, it helps runners stealing bases, but I still think he's someone that's going to have a lot of success behind the plate as he continues to grow. And the offense, it speaks for itself. It's really great to see. That home run the other night in Arizona, I know he got hosed on a strike call. He took his time out to reset himself. That was like a veteran move, not like a young player. And he brings a ton of energy. You could tell he loves being there and he loves to play. So hopefully this is good signs to come for him for the next decade plus, because I think we could be in for a lot of fun with this guy.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I guess we briefly mentioned Tommy Pham. Obviously,
Sure.
he's having. I mean, there was calls for him to get designated for assignment pretty early in the year, and
Hmm.
he's been great now. And then I guess it's just because he does it so quietly and just kind of ho hum. Is Brandon Nimmo? I mean,
Yeah.
he's been really good too. And then he had that where he just went on Babe Ruth for a
Yeah.
while and kind of out of nowhere. But he talked about it. There was a good article, and I forget where it was now, but there was a good article him talking to Jeremy Barnes and Eric Hinsky, and they were just like, "Look, you're a very good player, but you're this type of player, and you're leaving this in the tank. Like you could hit more home runs, you could have more power without sacrificing anything else."
Right.
And it, in the short term that we've seen since they talked to him, he's looked great. I mean,
Sure.
I've never seen Brandon Nimmo go on that type of power run, and certainly very welcome for a team that isn't hitting enough home runs. So, yeah, Brandon Nimmo's had just another great start to the season. Like you said, he's part of that. There still is a core here, like that. You have Nimmo, you have Alvarez for a long time. Beatty's had some struggles, but I mean,
Hmm.
he's third baseman of the future there. Hopefully, they extend Pete Alonso so he's there for a while. Kodai Senga is going to be there for a while. There's still a good core for this team. So at the very least, even if they don't make the playoffs or make a long run in the playoffs, you want to see them finish this season strong and at least make a run at the playoffs, make the trades that they need to do, and look like a team that's supposed to be winning. Because that's what they are, right? Like
Hmm.
they don't have the biggest payroll in baseball to be a team that's closer to out of the playoffs than they are in first place. So yeah, it's going to be, I mean, it's a second half that people are going to be fighting for their jobs, right?
Sure.
Like Steve Cohen came out and said that Epler and Showalter are safe for this year. But I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Cohen, he really likes Buck. I mean,
Hmm.
that was his hire, and he wants to give him a lot of rope. And Epler, I mean, let's face it, I just don't think it's good to fire. I mean, you don't see GMs fired in
Right.
season. It's just
Right.
it's tough with the draft coming up, trade deadline coming up. It's just tough to do. So look, Buck and Epler got a little more time, but if they really nosedive this thing, that's certainly not going to help either of those guys keep their jobs for
Sure.
next season.
Right.
Which certainly makes sense. I mean, Epler's got a big deadline coming up. However they decide to handle it, it's important that Epler makes the right moves. Um, Obviously for the Mets as an organization, but for him to keep his job. And Showalter, I think we got to see more out of Showalter, whether it's doing better with his bullpen decisions, whether it's making better decisions and better reasoning behind his decisions with young players. Like, let's say the Mets are out of it and they want to bring up Ronnie Mauricio. Like, if that happens, I think we need to make sure that Buck's going to handle that better
Right.
than the way he handled the previous young
Sure.
players coming up. So, yeah, there's a lot at stake for a lot of different people in a really important second half for the Mets, and I think I think I you always want to you never want to count a team out, and I don't in the back of my head just because like they do have that talent, right? Like they they still have Max Scherzer, they have Justin Verlander, Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Brandon Nimmo, Jeff McNeil. Can just keep going down the list, and that it's a good roster on paper.
Yeah.
So you want to believe at some point that some of these guys are going to bounce back and be who they are. Um, and if they do that, look, I mean, I don't think the National League is particularly strong
Sure.
outside of the Braves and maybe a couple of other teams,
Hmm.
Dodgers once they get healthy, but I don't think it's particularly strong. Like it's getting a wild card spot is definitely attainable, and like we've seen, once you get a wild card spot, get in the playoffs, anything can happen. It doesn't have to be a division winner that wins the World Series. So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to make any predictions because, look, I already made a prediction at the start of the year, and I think the Mets would have to play like 700 baseball for that prediction to be right, the win total I had. So I don't think we need any predictions from me, but certainly, I certainly think there's still a chance that the Mets have a good run in them.
Yeah, I mean, you saw it here the last couple of weeks, right? They won 6 straight games. You know, they play to the back of their baseball cards, this, like I said, is a talented group and it's a good core. But you know, it still remains to be seen for me. Unfortunately, just what I've seen this year, they don't do the little things well, and that might be the most frustrating thing for me from last year to this year, and especially with Showalter as well. Which that when he was brought in, like that's his thing, right? He's a stickler for that. And this year, it just feels like in a lot of big spots that they don't do the little things right, and it feels a little like they play a bit uninspired. And I don't know if that has to do with because, and again, I've said it, you know, I don't know if Buck, maybe he's not the right guy for this group, but the more I watch that, the more I think for this year, he probably isn't, because of the things that you're saying. And there's also not a lot of urgency with Buck. And I think, you know, especially when in May and especially June, when things were spiraling out of control, it just felt like the whole I'm proud of my guys every night after they kept losing series after series was not something that they needed. There's needed to be some sort of fire, but you know, I agree that they could certainly make a charge and have a good July and everything could turn around. But with all the teams in front of them now in the wild card and just the way that their starting pitching has been, um, I'm used to getting hurt from this team. I'm going to try and use my brain, and I hope that I'm wrong. That's what it always comes down to, right? I mean, use my eyeballs, but if they, you know, go on a tear and play 700 baseball for a month and a half, I'm be the first one excited. So, you know, hopefully that happens, but you know, it's just fortunately it seems like a hole they've dug themselves in that they just can't climb back out and gain any ground, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly very easy and even reasonable to be pessimistic about the Mets' chances in the second half for a lot of reasons we talked about. I mean, with Verlander and Scherzer struggling, look, they're at towards the end of their career, so
Yeah.
it's not unreasonable to expect that to continue to happen. And even if guys like Marte and McNeil pick it up, Beatty picks it up in the second half, they're just not going to go anywhere unless Scherzer and Verlander are better than guys with four ERA.
Sure.
They're
Sure.
aces. That's what they're here for,
Yep.
and that's what they need them to be. So um, we could talk to until we're blue in the face about it, but
Right.
I think the reality is the second half falls on those two guys. A
Sure.
large part of
Absolutely.
it falls on those two guys.
No, I agree. And you know, to round the show off here, we're not going to get in too deep because we're going to do a whole nother special on the draft, which is going on right now. It started on Sunday, Mike's favorite few days of the year, the MLB draft. But we want to end the show a little bit with Mike kind of just giving us a little snippet of some of the players that he liked in the first, you know, day or so here that the Mets drafted, and we'll end the show on that.
Yeah, so I mean, the obvious two guys to talk about are the first two picks that they got, because the Mets did spend over the luxury.
Right.
They were supposed to pick 22nd and got booted back 10 spots to the 32nd pick, and we're lucky enough that a top 15 talent was there, and Colin Houck, a shortstop, high school shortstop, very talented hitter. There is a chance like he ends up playing third base, but right now he's going to play shortstop once the Mets sign him. And yeah, this is a guy that very easily has a top 15 bat. He was one of the best prep hitters in the draft, and the Mets were lucky enough that he was there, and they took the best player available. And yeah, the Mets are super excited that they got him in the organization. Immediately becomes one of their best prospects. And we'll see once he gets signed and where he goes to start the year. And he's definitely a guy to keep an eye on because, yeah, I think I was trying to think of my list, and I think I would still have Kevin Parada number one on my Mets prospect list, but Houck is definitely in the conversation to be the Mets number two prospect.
Wow.
once they sign him. And then the next draft pick gets very interesting. I was trying to stay up for it, and the draft started at 7, and the first round just took quite a while, and the Mets' second pick didn't end up happening till like super late. And I woke up to the news that they drafted Brandon Sprout again. As some Mets fans might know, they drafted him last year and didn't sign him because he felt they drafted him in the 3rd round. He felt that he could build himself up to a first-round talent. The start of the year, he looked like that was going to be. He faded a little bit towards the end. He had some control issues. The walks got up there a little bit. But look, this is a right-hander that throws. He's pretty consistently 96 to 98, and he hits triple digits as well. Best secondary is a changeup that works really well off his fastball. I know it's been a joke in baseball a little bit. He throws a slutter. So that's one of his secondaries too. Okay. His fastball, even though he throws very hard, tends to get flat at times, and not in a good way. Sure. Doesn't move a ton. That's one of the issues that he has. And the bigger issues are the command. But yeah, this is a guy that they got into the 2nd round. Likely they'll get him under slot, and Houck will be over slot because he's going to want to get paid more, closer to a mid-first rounder than the 32nd overall pick. So, but yeah, I mean, so they got 2 top 50 talents there, which works out pretty well considering how the draft started when you don't have a pick until 32nd. And then they had comp picks. They had a compensation pick for Jake DeGrom signing with the Rangers. They signed a prep shortstop, left-handed hitter that looks pretty good, AJ Ewing. Let's see if he wears 33. That would be kind of funny if he wears 33 in orange and blue.
Yep.
But yeah, they made a couple other picks. They made a big run on pitching. They got a ton of pitchers today, which we'll dive into it more. So once they finish day 3 is on Tuesday, and they'll finish it up, and we'll kind of do a wrap of the whole draft. But yeah, so far they definitely got some upside with their first 2 picks, and they got some other interesting arms mixed in there, and then a couple of college shortstops between AJ Ewing and Boston Barrow, which is just a great name, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, we'll dive into those guys a little bit more. Hopefully tomorrow night after the draft, we'll talk some more. But yeah, I think the Mets have done a good job so far of infusing. Look, this team, I mean, especially from like prospect rating, especially at the top end, once they graduated, Alvarez, Beatty, and Vientos have graduated from those lists. It's dropped down. It's certainly middle to back end of like the teens probably is where their rankings would be now. So definitely good to infuse the farm system with a lot of young talent, especially if they do decide to be buyers at the deadline.
Sure.
Getting some talented players will kind of help fight against some guys that they might have to trade to get some arms or a bat at the deadline. So yeah, I think the first couple of days they've certainly done a good job of mixing upside with some dependable pitchers that they think will end up in the big leagues.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to hear about how the rest of the draft goes and really get the deep dive from you. And we know you're one of the best at doing this with everything Mets minor leagues and draft related. So that'll be awesome. Enjoy the rest of the Derby tonight. The All-Star game tomorrow. Hopefully it's a good one. And we'll catch up to you, like we said, when the draft is over, and we'll go over. Mike will give us his grades on the rest of the picks and kind of dive into where the Mets stand organizationally. So until then, enjoy the All-Star weekend, like I said, and let's go Mets.